Good evening. Welcome to the online lecture by Rebecca Lamarche-Vadel, which is the second session of the Curatorial Lectures, a yearly series centering around different topics in relation to the curatorial hosted by SMAC, the Municipal Museum of Contemporary Art in Ghent, the University of Ghent, and Curatorial Studies. Over the past 4 years, we've invited curators to speak about topics ranging from their collaborations with artists to their views on collections. And this year, we continue the series online and hopefully offline in the spring of next year, with a series inviting curators to reflect upon their practices in relation to questions of space. A topic obviously informed by the global pandemic and the closing of art institutions, but also stemming from a more general interest in the challenges of developing new formats across different contexts and architectures in a rapidly changing world, from site-specific or site-oriented approaches to the translocal spaces of digital networks. Last month, we were happy to have Cecilia Alemani, who talked about curating art in unconventional spaces, namely the High Line in New York and the Italian Pavilion in Venice. And we look forward to welcome Karen Archie and Ippolito Pestellini Laparelli in the spring of 2021, hopefully live with us in Ghent. This evening, we are pleased to welcome Rebecca Lamarche-Vadel, the former curator at Palais de Tokyo and current director of the Fondation Lafayette Anticipations in Paris, an institution which, at least in my opinion, is one of the most exciting venues in Paris, not only in terms of its architecture, a 19th century building remodeled by Rem Koolhaas and OMA, into a building as machine, but even more so because of its challenging program that brings the machine to life, so to speak, and the institution's important focus on artistic practice and production. Rebecca is also chief curator of the second edition of the Riga Biennial and Suddenly It All Blossoms, an exhibition which was from its inception built on the theme of the end of the world. And tonight she will share with us the experience of preparing the exhibition, the decision of opening the show despite a very precarious situation, which many of the participating artists forced to reinvent their original ideas, prompting the process of rethinking the whole project, both as an exhibition and a feature film to be premiered in 2021. Questions that might pop up along the way are very welcomed. So I invite you to use the chat to ask questions, which I will then direct to Rebecca on your behalf at the end of her lecture. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me. Thank you, all of you that I can't see, but I can feel your energies. I'm very happy to be here tonight to speak about something that is very special for me, is curating a biennial in times of pandemic. So I will guide you through this very special project that had to become a very special project due to our circumstances. But maybe as an introduction, I will start with what the project was always supposed to be. It was always a question on the idea of the possibility of a new world. This meaning like this general feeling of being at the end of psychological, philosophical, aesthetical, political, ecological systems, and how can we now eventually through the artist and through the art find ways to inhabit this world differently. This topic of reenchantment came from my past exhibitions with Thomas Saraceno, with Tino Segal, with Marguerite Humeau, with many artists who always brought me to this question permanently, asking like, how can we somehow renew the way we are being humans? And I was struck by the increase of numbers of apocalyptic discourse that were kind of resignating or resignations that were stating that basically it was the end of the world. And the proposition of and suddenly it all blossomed was more like it's the end of our world. But what kind of other world is there to build after that? What kind of new relationship? What kind of new way of sensing, of building links, of acknowledging, of giving attention, of paying attention could there be? So we were very happy. I mean, quite exhausted, but very happy. It was in March, and we knew that we were about to open in the next 2 months. But as everyone knows, like things went differently. So on the 14th of March, when we saw that the pandemic was rising and that all borders were like suddenly closing and that public gatherings were like more and more forbidden, we gathered with the direction of the biennial and came to the understanding that the biennial, which installed already started, like the first walls had been teared down in the space that I'm going to show you. But we had to freeze everything. We basically had to freeze everything and decide that the show would not be able to open as we imagined it 2 months later, but would also not be able to open as the works were supposed to be and as the world plan was. So what happened is that we called, I called each and every artist, discussing the fact that we would try, despite everything, to maintain an exhibition, but an exhibition that was about the end of the world. And because it was happening, there was no way that we would try to postpone this show to a moment where it was back to normality. It was like, for me, it was very important that the show somehow was meeting its subject. And it's very rare for a show because an exhibition is usually out of the world somehow and is speaking about it from a very distant place. And suddenly the topic that we were discussing was kind of hitting us in the face. And I really wanted to, and thanks to the artist and with the artist, acknowledge our lack of power, our impossibility, our humility, and the need for this humility. Because I always think about exhibitions as a very controversial ritual that we put together where we control so many things and we put together hierarchies and distances and so on. And this one was like, okay, finally, somehow we're going to be challenged, and we're going to be challenged by the topic we were addressing. So with each and every artist, we had to discuss whether our original plans could happen. If yes, how? If not, how so? And what could we do? Let me kill the suspense now. Like, we had to change almost every plan. Like almost every single plan had to be readapted, changed, reinvented in some ways very radically, like with the work never being presented and the space being empty. In other ways, like very minimally. But I will go through the exhibition and of course show you about this. But when we decided that the show would still open, it was quite clear in August, it was quite clear that we had no guarantee that anyone could come, that we could gather, that we could open this show to anyone. So the idea of making a movie came in. Making a movie because this was basically the only way we had to reach out to audiences that could not come there. And basically doing a movie was also for me a way to reflect on this exhibition, on what it was, and this distance with the camera and looking at us being in the space and transforming the show itself into a movie set was something that I found extremely interesting and exciting. So this is a long introduction to just like give you the setup of the preliminary paradigms of this exhibition. But what happened, like when I visited Riga, so I worked for several years on this show, and I visited with the team of the biennial every single corner of Riga. But what struck me during one visit was this place that you see here in red, which is called André Salin. It's a district, I don't know, can you see like me moving around there? So you have here in the middle, the center, and André Salin is just there. It's basically 10 minutes away by walk from the city center. But from the citizens, the inhabitants of Riga, André Salin is somewhere from another world. It doesn't exist because this place has been cut from the city, like by fences and by like private investors after the fall of the USSR. And so people were completely cut from the access of this place that is like hyper central, but that was not part anymore of the mental landscape of this city. I was struck personally by the strength of this place, which was talking about everything that I wanted to address, which was like, what we do with what we inherit. And after Anad Singh, I have to say, like, who's speaking a lot about what can we build out of the ruins where we're living, you know, out of what we inherit, not looking for another place, but just acknowledging what is there. And for me, of course, this looks a lot like Tarkovsky, for example. But it was like something where I would see like toxic grounds. I would see like the heritage of industrial times, of capitalist hopes, of new ecosystems with birds and different plants that were growing. It was all of that, like decay and life at once sparked together. So this is the place that I visited, and very early on, so this was a paintball, an abandoned paintball that was there. I decided that we would work with everything we would find on site. We would not change anything. We would collaborate. We would not colonize. We would just discuss. And so every artist was basically invited to produce a show, produce a work that would be in touch with whatever was there found on site, which saved us, which is the reason why this exhibition could happen. And this started more as an ethical position, saying like, okay, we cannot speak about another world and like still like spend I don't know how many kilos of CO2 in transports and have the same behaviors that in the old world, where we think that everything is available and we can just like use and misuse like every tool. So most of the artists actually had works that were really built on site. So this is, for example, like the main venue that was 18,000 square meters, and the whole territory is 22,000 square meters. For me, what was beautiful with that, it was becoming a real odyssey. It was bringing the visitor into not only a spiritual, but also a physical moment. It was like 5 hours from the first work to the last one. And it was really about, okay, how this exhibition can also propose other rhythms, other ways of interacting, not only with the works, but also with the city, with these like spaces and territories that have been kind of taken away from the inhabitants. So this is, for example, like the spaces we found and that were the setting. So this is the plan of what became the exhibition. Here you had the entrance, and over here I'm gonna go basically through the show, and you're gonna and discuss like quite fast because there are quite many works and we don't have so much time, but to introduce you to what kind of odyssey this show was about. But this here was the beginning. Then you would go in through the hangars, then here a little house, then here would be the paintballs, and then you would have here everywhere meadows, greenhouse, like quite like wastelands, abandoned spaces. Then you would go this way and you would have like another intervention on the water and walk towards the final building, which was like a very, very big building, which is the one that I just showed you. And when everything collapsed and we had to decide to do the movie, I basically had to come up with an idea for this movie. And the idea was straight to not do a documentary, but more to propose something else that would be an extension of the work. And so this is the first work. And so basically the movie that is going to come out and that we are almost finished now is basically based on the odyssey that the visitors were going through as well, starting with the first work from Haneli Part till the last one from Cyprien Gaillard. And basically, you're guided by a voice that is kind of, for me, the voice of a zeitgeist of the now, filled with like all of the questions, the incertitudes, the doubts that we might have now that we're the threshold of one old and a new world. And it's more of a proposition in itself, where I was quite inspired by Chris Marker, for example, or Tarkovsky, and yeah. So this movie was co-realized with Davis Semanis, who's a Latvian director, and was extremely important to make the magic happen, because we had only a few weeks to prepare everything. So here we're gonna start. So this was basically just before the gates of the biennial. We are here, over there. This is Haneli Part, and Haneli Part's poems were about the world we live in now, and was kind of a prologue. These poems are about our contactless world, a world where nothing is solid, and where we kind of lose touch with each other, like and we lose touch with whatever surrounds us. And this was kind of a mindset before entering the gates and going through the gates, that were for me kind of the other world is starting after these gates, or this idea of going through a hole that you see here. So this was then, once you would walk through the biennial, the first work. This first work was by Ugo Rondinone, and this first work had to be redone completely. Basically, it was supposed to be a giant neon work from Ugo that was stored in Switzerland, and it appeared to be completely impossible to bring it. So what we discussed and what Hugo agreed on was that we would basically do a fake Ugo Rondinon out of plywood that would be painted every night by painters in Riga that would like try to match like every color and every detail like as good as well as possible, and obviously they managed. And this became the fake real Ugo Rondinon that was like basically the introduction to this biennial, and which was called Lifetime. Lifetime, of course, and as the first work, it was basically a call and a quest and a riddle that is given to you, like asking you to think about what is the time of life? Is it the time you're given? Is it the time bigger than you? Like, what are you doing with the time that is given to you? Are you losing it? Are you spending it? Are you rushing after it? How are you investing it? All of these questions were basically addressed to you as a visitor. Then you were proposed to go through this rabbit hole like Alice in Wonderland and discover the first part of this exhibition that was about time and about building worlds, making worlds. So here you will have the show of, the work of Bridget Polk. And throughout the whole show, you have many people who don't call themselves artists, but who through their practice that I find so singular and so special and so unique, I would call in the realm of art making. Bridget Polk is someone that I worked with so many times. I need her in almost every show that I do. She's basically piling up these rocks. She was there on site every day. We managed to make Bridget come from the US, and that is already a story in itself, but she managed to go through many borders. And here you see her like trying to find the balance that looks quite impossible, like everything that you see behind her. And actually it works. It's about patience, it's about resilience, it's about a bit like Sisyphus, accepting that everything that she's putting up might go down. And this is of course a metaphor for us, like what we build as humans, as civilizations, as cultures will eventually go down. And Bridget was there every day, really bringing back like the stones, the rocks where they were when they fell. But the thing with those sculptures that you don't know how long they will last. They can last from 30 seconds to 3 years and even more. So they're also hold their own secrets and mysteries that we have to accept and deal with. So here you see another example of this. Then we would go into the little house that was just like after these hangars, and we would have the work of Heinz Frank. Heinz Frank is an Austrian, was an Austrian because he passed away a few days before the opening, unfortunately, but we were very honored to be able to show this well, not these original drawings, because once again, we could not ship the original drawings. So I did what I never thought I would ever dare to do in my entire life, was that I had to show photocopies from original drawings from Heinz Frank. And this comes from architectural studies that he did, where he wanted to teach architects to think and act like childs and children, and put together the imagination, the freedom, the wildness of a child spirit. So we had like a series of these drawings that dates from the 70s till the 90s. And one of them was this one, which is a work that you will actually encounter later. And this idea was that here, as a visitor, you would be confronted with kind of visions or hopes, or what one can call utopias, but afterwards in your visit you would actually meet the work that became the drawing that became a work. So here we are. I will show you. We just got out of the small house, and here you would walk towards the paintball field. So the paintball field was like, I think, a ready-made, because it was like in itself like quite an amazing space with all of these different constructions that were filled with paint because of paintball and people shooting themselves with paint inside. And this became the work of Anastasia Sosunova, who imagined that a civilization here, the Droseras Forêt, had inhabited this place. And she was really using science fiction as a tool to imagine other civilizations, and so to put our own into perspectives and imagine other ways of being, of imagining, of behaving. And so here she imagined that they would have built a temple to stray cats and flying cats who were actually protecting them from the rain. Because we're in this paintball, there were like no roofs anywhere. But here, actually, there is one on top of this tower, but otherwise no. And she imagined that this like flying cats would actually protect the Droseras Forêt. So you would wander basically through a space that was a space that belonged to someone else, and someone that you had a very little chance to understand, because they had other rituals, they had other ways of being and feeling and sensing. Which brought us to the next work, which is the work of Dora Budor. So Dora Budor initially imagined a performance that was made of crowds of humans. So I don't need to explain why it became quite impossible as a project. And so Dora decided to transform this performance that was about basically putting in the foreground the crowds that are usually in cinema in the background. You know, this like anonymous crowd that are kind of there to support the leader or the hero, and that are kind of private, I mean, deprived from any character or position. And that's what she wanted to inquire on with the humans. When it proved impossible to do because of the COVID, she decided to replace them with dogs, with stray dogs that would basically hunt all of the territory, and that you would encounter for your walk. And so we had this dog. So this is Ludis, for example, who was hanging out a lot and who became a character of the movie as well. These dogs, they were hanging out a lot in what seems at first like this wasteland that were like just abandoned, but actually they were the work of Via Enigna. Via Enigna is the Pope or the Tina Turner of healing plants in Latvia. And what happens, like through the months before the exhibition, we did do bomb seeding. So basically, you know, you put like lots of seeds of healing plants together, and you throw them everywhere, and they will eventually build. They will eventually grow. So here we had basically what we love to think as the garden of the 21st century, something that would be filling the cracks, and that would be growing in the interstices of the asphalt, that would kind of reclaim this territory. So here you see like a mix of like these different plants that would grow, and with the local plants and the local ecosystems that were already in place. Then you would arrive to what I showed you earlier, which is the work by Heinz Frank, which is this rhino that became a real rhino, but actually a playground for kids. So we would have everyday kids going there and basically performing their wildness. And this is what Heinz Frank was interested in. So here we are in the meadows over there, and we're going to walk towards Lina Lapellite. So Lina Lapellite did this. So here you see a performance that happened for the movie, because we did shoot it especially for that day. But otherwise, she was doing this big installation of this wood that was taken from basically an old tradition in the Baltic countries. It was to take this forest up north and like go through these logs, go through the river down and like fill the countries of the south of Europe with these different logs. And here she did build basically an island on which they would come and perform these new songs, the songs of women, like in the middle of this island, dancing and basically chanting new rhythms. So here you see them performing. So now we're going to go up towards the port building. And here you have the first work that you would encounter in the port building, which is Valdis Sams. Valdis Sams was an artist in his 70s. He's an artist in his 70s who's doing kinetic art, which is very much about how different beings can meet and how we are in permanent relationship. So what you can't see here is that the work is basically constantly moving, and that you would see like these different bodies coming together in and out in a relationship. Here we had Pavel Altamer. Pavel Altamer was supposed to be a massive room, like 4,000 square meters, painted completely in white. And we were hoping that for the opening, thousands of people would come together and would basically paint and draw together, which proved completely impossible. So this is the project of the Draftsmen's Congress. And so instead, Pavel proposed to launch like a first drawing, which was the one in the middle, this vortex, and that people would draw after it and just basically do an exquisite corpse out of this drawing, but one that would have to be done from distance because no one could be together. What was interesting for me was to, go from, for example, this work initially was supposed to be an absolutely monumental work, incredibly impressive, very powerful, very dominating somehow. And it ended up being this pile of photocopies on the ground with all of its modesty, with all of its poverty, with all of its promises as well. And it was very important. So you can see, for example, here, you can't really see, but this room is absolutely immense. And it became, the room and a place welcoming something extremely modest. This was the work of Nina Bayer. So all of these sections were about relationships. And here you had two lions that are like fake lions in marble that are used basically to decorate her house, and is more or less a metaphor of us as humans, like mastering the wild and something that is standing as a symbol of the wild, which is the lion. And on this lion, there would be like basically every day a pregnant woman coming to pour milk into its negative spaces. And this is a scene from the movie where we had like cats coming and drinking from this milk poured from by the pregnant woman into these lions. Basically, the idea was the question of relationship, because when we arrived in André Sala, in that territory, there were many stray cats that were already inhabiting that space. And Nina wanted to do a gesture of hospitality and of welcoming towards them, but also being aware that the more we would try to go close to them, the more we would potentially destroy them or destroy their presence or their equilibrium. So she was always thinking in all of this work about the danger of relationships and the fact that like going closer and closer might not be a guarantee for understanding and for interesting collaboration. So this pregnant woman was a performance with, after feeding the cat that was actually going to drink the milk on this lions, she would go, so this is one scene from the movie. This is actually I did put here and there, like when I could find some settings from the movie. So this is what you would see if you would come to the exhibition. We were shooting every day, really on site, and I mean shouting and it was like really a movie set where you have to redo 1,000 times the same scene, especially this one, because believe me, trying to deal with a wild cat in 5,000 square meters is an exercise that I wish everyone to try one day. And so it was like a very special atmosphere, very ghostly, as you can see, very surreal as well, which transformed the show itself into something that I was really interested in. But long story short, this pregnant woman had to go out and go just in front of the building towards these Range Rovers. And there was like one pregnant woman in each Range Rover, which were serving as kind of pavilions or places where they would kind of not hide themselves, but protect themselves. And what was interesting for Nina was the fact that the paradox of Range Rovers, which are cars that are being marketed or sold as cars that are helping you to get closer and closer to the wild, to nature, because they can go like in the most incredible paths and so on. But at the same time, you're destroying it completely because you're using an extremely polluting car. So again, she was like addressing this paradox or these contradictions in the question of relationships. Then we would go to the next one, which was about building relationship with the ground. And this is a work by Catherine Orneck. And Catherine Orneck proposed a meditation where she would propose to think about the clay being like 320 million years old. So something that life potentially came from with the first bacteria. And she proposed through this meditation that would tell you about the way we've been dealing with the earth and the clay, to draw and basically to let yourself go into different, into drawing or doing whatever you wanted on this place, which became basically revealing the mental landscapes of whoever was coming. And we did basically a first workshop with teenagers, which became also a scene for the movie. And basically the teenagers, because they were themselves in a position, in an age where you're in a moment of transition, let's say, between two states, like childhood and adulthood, and a moment of uncertainty, or where you're just being a teenager basically. And what was interesting was that to understand the way they would deal with this transformation that they were basically doing through drawing. So we have a scene here you can see in the movie where we see them acting and basically performing and giving shape to their own unconscious. Then we had someone building very high intensity relationship with the sky and with the air, which is Philippe Petit. So Philippe Petit, for me, did maybe the biggest performance of the 21st century, although he's basically a wire walker. And he did this performance in '74, where he did walk between the two twin towers for 20 minutes, so 450 meters high. He did prepare this for 6 years. He was obsessed with the Twin Towers since he saw them like when he was 18 years old. He did like do an amazing process of like preparation. And we did show photocopies again, because that was honestly, this show was a lot about forgiving, or like forgetting about plants, because here we wanted, and I was really looking forward to that, was to show all of the archive of what I call like, which is the biggest coup, like the biggest, most beautiful artistic crime of the century. And instead of the real archives, we had to show photocopies. Again, thank God photocopies exist, and reproductions of all the tools and everything he did put together to make that coup. So of course he had to hide himself. He did do fake ID papers. He did like pretend that he was like from a cleaning company. He did hide himself for 12 hours up there because the guards were touring. He had other friends on the other tower, and he did use this boat to just basically launch the wire, and then did walk and did this amazing thing, which was about basically reclaiming New York, or like one of the symbols of like modernity in New York, and control and power and vertical architecture. And I mean, Remcool has spoke about it very interestingly. And he was reclaiming that space in all of its fragility. And I mean, he walked without any security, without any guarantees, and it just makes meaning in the emptiness. And in dialoguing with the air, which is an environment that we're so not in touch with. So this brings me to the next work, which is the work of Thomas Saraceno, who's proposing himself as well to be much more in touch with the air through the new epoch of the Aerocene. So initially, we were hoping that Thomas would send a flying sculpture to Riga. And I'm not joking, it was really serious, because as you might know, Thomas Saraceno is someone who proposed these balloons that are flying thanks to the earth resources. So it's a collaboration with the air, with the sky, with the wind, with the sun. But the problem is, like, with the confinement, we could not follow the balloon if the balloon would eventually go down, and we were not able to pursue this dream of making it happen, having the first flying sculpture coming to a biennial. So instead we showed this work, which is a backpack that is enabling anyone to reclaim the sky, to reclaim the air by using this backpack and using it, making it fly, and using it to either like measure pollution, sound, like draw poems, I don't know, anything that you want. The idea being that the air is a place that has been completely taken away from us, from citizens, by private interest or by states, and that the violence of the politics that is happening in the air, also through pollutions and 2.5 p.m., for example, is something that we have to address and that we can fill up with meaning, with poetry, but also with political gesture. So Thomas was there. We were very happy and very lucky to have Thomas around. So he did actually, you can see him now. He did fly the balloon, and we did have our flying sculpture in the end, at least for a few minutes. And this is also part of the movie. And then, oh, that's a beautiful story. Thomas was asking me forever, like, Rebecca, I'm not sending a spider web to Riga. I'm not doing like CO2, more CO2 footprint. I want to find spider web in Riga, and we will collaborate with the spider web. And so super easy, of course. So I did spend like a few months desperately looking for decent spider webs, and of course there were so many in the space, but every time they were either super far or hidden or not that impressive or like not in the right place. I mean, there was basically 1 week before the opening of the show, there is no spider webs that was suiting the dream and the requirements from Thomas. And one day, literally 4 days before the show or something like that, of course, the elevator broke, which is, for those who are familiar with install, a total disaster, but which happens all the time at that moment. So, of course, we needed it, I mean, incredibly, to bring things up, down. It was the only elevator of this massive building I showed you. And all the team was very rightly panicking and so on. And I was just going to the stairs because there was no elevators, and suddenly I just see people like in an engine room, and I see them and I see their light, and it's like, and I look again, and I see what you have now in front of you, which is like, basically this is the engine room of the elevator that I would have never seen if this didn't break. So you see, there is nothing. I mean, it's very positive in the end, this story. And we discovered these amazing spider webs that are absolutely stunning. And that must be, I mean, I don't know, 10 years old. Like they hold all of the dust and the history of this place. And they also vibrate when the elevator is moving. And so this became the surprise work by Thomas Saraceno. So now we're going to the upstairs. I mean, just to give you a sense of the space, but it was like we would take the stairs and we would go to a section that was wondering more about disappearance and life in general. So this is a work called De-Extinction by Pierre Huyghe, and which is basically a camera going through a very tiny piece of amber being a very important material in the Baltic states as well. So it relates a lot to the countries in the region. And in this, we discovered the bodies of many different species. Here you can see different mosquitoes. And so basically it was an interrogation on death and disappearance, but also thinking that, okay, these animals or these beings are dead, but they're still there. And we can obviously like see them, feel them, encounter them. So it was like, maybe what we think about death might not be right, and what we think about endings might not be right. And this might be something we should or could reconsider, which was also the idea of this work, which is by Oliver Beer. And Oliver Beer is making empty objects resonate. He helps us to understand their voice, because they actually have a voice, and if you make them sing now or in a million years, they will always have the same sound. And this is a collection of works of objects that belong to Aspasia, who was a very important feminist intellectual in the late 19th and mid 20th century in Latvia. And so these are objects that basically were close to her and who heard her and that she might have never heard in return. And in this work, we could finally hear them. And we had for several occasions this choir of different singers who came and who did sing with the song of the objects. Also, you might see empty plinths. These empty plinths are again a change of plan. We were supposed to have the objects belonging to 3 other members of the family of Oliver, but we could not ship them. So instead of pretending that nothing happened, we decided to show these empty plinths and to acknowledge the costs of this whole project and this work, especially in these circumstances. And so here you see the camera, because we were shooting the scene of their performance. The next work is Dominica Halls of V, and Dominica Halls of V, you see an empty room because like most of the work didn't happen, at least in Riga. What happened is that she did produce all of the work in Warsaw and did exhibit it at the same time as the biennial, but in a gallery in Warsaw, as we could not ship it. But still, we could show one piece of the work, which was this stained glass, on which you see this smell coming out of this coffee, and that is reaching the nose, and the nose is spilling out a ghost, because all of the project of Dominica was about death, and she was very interested in this Latvian figure who's called Velumate, and Velumate is the goddess of death, and Dominica is very interested in the way we are not, or we have problems to acknowledge death and disappearance and disease and whatever is breaking basically this hope for eternity, of immortality. And she was very interested in the whipper, the figure of the whipper, the professional whippers that are being called in many, many, many cultures, actually, from India to North Africa to Poland and South America, where basically professional comedians, whippers, are there to perform grief and suffering. And so we had our own professional whipper who came and who was in the space and who was crying at this work, and which became one of the performance and one of the scenes of the movie. Speaking about changes of worlds, we had this work by Eva Lust, who was very interested by the calenture. The calenture is something that I didn't know of before Eva told me about this. It's actually something that exists, is a tropical fever that happens to sailors. And when the sailors are hit by this tropical fever, they start to have hallucinations. And when they are on the sea, they basically start to see the ocean transforming into meadows and the grass. And into grass. And the problem is that they hallucinate so much that they finish by jumping overboard. And so this disease is very well known and is very recognized as something very dangerous. But basically, Eva took it as a metaphor for jumping from a world we know to a world we don't know, and not thinking about it in bad or dangerous terms, but rather into something that was worth inquiring. And so her movie would go overboard as well and jump into the Daugava, which is the river of Riga, and explore what kind of presences would still be there. Then we were going into another section that was more about questioning the idea of orders, architectures, and this is work by Hisham Berada, who did accelerate the decay of the city of Riga in 1 million years, basically, because of its formation and its chemical existence. And basically, Hisham Berada is an alchemist. He is able to stop time, to fast forward it, and so on. And so here we just watched like how life would go on after us and how things would happen after us. And this was the work of Daina Taiminia. So Daina Taiminia is a mathematician, but who did through many years start to work on this crochet technique. And this crochet technique is made to try to explain hyperbolic geometry. So I'm absolutely not a mathematician person, and I would be very wrong to pretend to be, but basically you have in geometries and in the explanation of the order of the world, the Euclidean geometry, the non-Euclidean geometry, and the hyperbolic spaces are basically claiming that the world is not made out of symmetry, is not made out of perfect order, but is rather like building itself through different paces and architectures that are not necessarily symmetrical and ordered. So this is quite a revolution in the thinking that also inspired a lot the Cubists, for example, and was very important in the transformation of perspectives also in art history. But here in this work, so we had basically during the confinement to send open calls, and what happened is that it became incredibly successful, and the whole country started to do crochet. And we received like 800 or 900 crochet by different women. Of course, it was like mainly women who did crochet together. What was interesting as well is that this theory, this mathematical theory is potentially extremely revolutionary, and was done with a technique that is potentially very domestic, and that is usually done, you know, in the domestic areas, very quietly, very secretly, by women who are not asked to, you know, speak about any questions about the world and the order of the world. And suddenly it was empowering, or thinking about transforming this gesture into something extremely empowering and into something extremely political as well. And here the crochet that you see, they've been done by women of all types, but also by blind women, by women who were in jail. So very different type of persons. And what was quite nice is that without us seeing it in the confinement, through the months, through the weeks, there was this kind of big Ariane wire that was being built between people, and that they discovered all of this together finally during the exhibition. Then there is the question of us trying to master what we don't know, or try to grasp it and control it. And here you have the Poudzoris. The Poudzoris is an object that is a very important object in Latvian and Lithuanian cultures. That is something that people would put in their interiors, and basically is something that protects you. That is also like moving depending on the wind, but depending on all the energy you cannot see. And it's really like a guardian, but it's also, of course, a metaphor for the unknown, and our desperate attempt maybe to try to grasp things. So this is a work by Eva Krish, a couple of choreographers from Latvia, from Riga. And this is a work that they've done during confinement in their kitchen. And they had to stop doing it because it could not go out the door anymore. But this is basically a work that is acknowledging all of this time that we all had to spend as well, like in our interiors. And this one was potentially trying to know the end date of the confinement or something. But we had several performances happening from Eva and Krish, who came to dance basically with the shadows done with this by these Poudzoris. Then we had the work of Agnese Krivade. Agnese Krivade basically had the people in the entrance of this huge building that were there all the time, but that were not doing anything special. So you might, in most cases, never notice them. They were just, as we see them now, like being there. They were like hanging out, they were like moving gently, but there was nothing performative, nothing obvious. It was just about being and being present. And what happened is that basically on top of them, if you would raise your head, you would see this house. And in this house, you would see here on the right side, Saint Christopher. Saint Christopher was very interesting for Agnese because Saint Christopher is a saint with a dog face that has been existent in the religion for like many centuries, but very lately, last century, the church decided that it was impossible that a saint could have a dog face. There could be no God with a dog face. And so they chopped his face somehow and said that Saint Christopher was not eligible as a saint anymore. But Agnese Krivade was doing this work and this put this relationship between those people who are kind of looking for answers and like, you know, being there, trying to find some signals, and putting it into conversation with this dog and the saint who saved many lives, although he might have never existed. And it was like, but this dog might not be a saint, but it still saved many lives. So what do we do with this belief? And is it more, I mean, is the importance not more about what we believe in and how much we believe than what is there, or if it's true or if it's existing? So this is something around the idea of fake healing as well. The next work, so this is what you would see. Oh yes, sorry. So once you would go in this house upstairs, you would go and see through the window actually these people, these performers downstairs, and start to understand that they are actually part of the work, and they are basically the ones that St. Christopher is looking at permanently. The next work is by Egle Budvitite, and it's a work that is very inspired by Octavia Butler, amongst others, and that is was shot in Lithuania, and where dancers, like a group of dancers, starts to behave like very differently, like unhumanly, if I may say, and start to really change their perspectives and the way they move and so on, which was very much for Egle a way to question, like, first the way we are being human, but also a way of building other relationships with the ground. And she was very inspired by the idea that we are humus, not humus, but humus, and that we are basically our decay as beings, us, will create the soils and the fertile soils for the beings to come. And this permanent entanglement between life and death was something that she wants to acknowledge and understand that we can serve as many lives to thrive after us, and that there is no such thing as being afraid of that kind of order. This was then a new section that was more about the question of alternative being. And this is Bendik Giske. Bendik Giske is a saxophonist who's working a lot with the question of surrender, because he's using a technique that is called circulatory breathing, which means that it would take one breath of air, and this breath would travel and travel and travel, and would, because of this moment of kind of closed circuit, like do like wrong noises or noises that it doesn't really master. And for him, the idea of surrender is extremely important, also as inspired by Jack Halberstam, for example, and such theoreticians, like how one can just let go and accept that what is not controlled is also something that can be welcomed, and that something can be created out of this. So this was the work by Bendik, and we did shoot Bendik in the movie, performing as well, like in the exhibition. The next work was by Janus Sama. Janus Sama is an artist from Estonia, and he was very interested in the question of cruising. So cruising, for those who might not know, is a practice that is as old as humanity, which is about basically hanging out in certain places that one would know as places for cruising, because it's a community that shares also like this kind of informations. And it's a place where you can hang out and spend time and eventually meet people and eventually have sexual encounters, but not only. It can also be not sexual, but it's basically about reclaiming public spaces, because it's always in public spaces. And Janus went through the private diary of someone called Irbe, who did like 60 years of cruising in Riga. And so who, thanks to that, like gave all the tricks about where to cruise in Riga. And what you see here in what looks like a USS or pavilion of sorts are the places where basically something subversive or another way of being in the space, another way of being together was actually happening. And this is like the opera, is the central market, is the train station, is the park, is the zoo. So it's extremely public spots. The next work is by Alex Pachitsky-Jenkins, and was Faggots and Friends, a movie that he did in Warsaw that was confronting, I mean, diving into the life of a community that is close to Alex, which is a community of different individuals that don't recognize themselves in binary thinking, let's say, and Alex follows them into like their everyday life, but also into more like exceptional moments. And one of the, I mean, there are so many striking moments in this one, but there is one where you see a peaceful protest of this community in Warsaw, and suddenly a very strong and very violent confrontation with right-wing people who are basically like pointing at them and insulting them in incredibly violent ways. And this to say maybe that and suddenly it all blossoms. The title of the show might sound very positive or very optimistic, but I think it's not, in the sense that it wants to be, of course, and I want to be optimistic. But for me, this title is about the it. Is about a huge question mark about what will eventually blossom at the end of our world and the birth of a new one. And so you had works that were quite confronting in terms of lack of perspectives as well, or like the need for us to think twice about the perspectives that we don't have yet. And this one was one acknowledging that amongst others. The next work was by Berenice Olmedo, who was again speaking about other ways of beings. And here it's a work that she's been doing with prostheses that are dedicated to child and that have been worn by child. And this prosthesis dance, the dance of someone trying to basically stand, but who's unable to do so. And the work of, so you had like, you see here 4 of them that were like, so they are animated, they have engines, and I mean, it's quite a moving, it's a very moving work. And the question of Berenice is more about why do we want to normalize and standardize bodies? Why can't we accept that someone might not be able to walk, or can walk differently, or can have like have other abilities that might not be the one of being vertical and running and standing, and that there might be other valuable ways of being humans. And this, because she sees these prostheses, I mean, as very paradoxical objects that are as enablers, but that are also like objects that are basically fitting a political and an ideological program about humanity. The next work is by Sarah Ortmeyer, and Sarah Ortmeyer thought about the prosthesis for the mind or the language somehow, because she was very interested in the emoji language. And how this universal language that comes back to a very old language, that is the hieroglyphs, was used again and was enabling us to express emotions that we might not be able to express otherwise. I don't know about you, but I put flowers and hearts quite a lot everywhere, which is something that I don't usually do like verbally. And somehow I feel what Sarah is addressing there is like this moment that fills gaps in our abilities of expressing some emotions. So here you see also like shooting the work, which was amazing, by the way, because I got to spend a good 4 hours with each one of these works, which was an immense privilege and such a pleasure, because it never happens in the real life that you can tell people I'm taking a week off to spend it with my works in the show. And this happened, which was quite exceptional. So now we would go to the next chapter, which was about loves, so plural loves. And here you have one room. That was the room of Felicia Atkinson, who was empty because we could not do the work. But still, it was a sound work. So you would have here a composition by Felicia, who's a very interesting sound artist as well. And she did a song that is Love for Anna. So Love for Anna stands for Anna Happiness, who was a Latvian individual who was weaving, and who was like basically very interested in patterns that would link like the infra and the meta dimensions, and who was like basically drawing all the time the different connections between the micro and the macro. And so one could just spend time in this empty space and listen to that song. That is a song that is yeah, dedicated for the love and I think gratitude that Felicia felt for Anna Happiness, who inspired her in her work. The next work was Edith de Kint work. So there was also a performance. Many works were activated in the show permanently or less permanently by humans. But as you might see, humans were always inhabiting this space like in a very interesting or unusual way, which is also what happens in the movies. Like the humans, when they happen to be there, they are somehow humans that are unhuman because we don't know that kind of humanity, which was something that was quite interesting for me at least. And so here you have the work of Edith de Kind, and here Anna, the performer, who was working on this bed of dust. So this bed of the layers of history of this building of André Salade that were basically brought together. And she was every day working on this. And she was, here you can see her bent over towards the garlic that you see here. And this garlic is fermented garlic that was coming from the central market. And it's basically a metaphor for protection against everyday vampires, basically. And Edith was very interested in the properties that we give to garlic. It's also like the garlic is a very protective ingredient in general against disease, against any type of ways of being armed. And basically Anna was caring about it, was like spending all of her day caressing it and basically taking care of it, and was moving it from one of these aquariums to the other. And these aquariums used to belong to the zoo of Riga, and were basically filled with lots of traces still, like the traces of the life that they had been at the same time carrying and protecting, but at the same time in jailing. So the animals that they were they had inside. Here is the work by Augusta Serapinas, and this is again another work that we had to change before the COVID. So basically the proposition of Augustus was that we would, and we were all very excited by it, we would wait for the winter, for the snow. And when the snow would happen, we would have like a brigade of different art students, or whoever was actually wanting to participate, who would run around in the city and wait for families to build snowmen. And once they would have finished the snowman, the brigade would go and like steal the snowman for a few hours, redo them in another material, so wood or clay or something, and then we would have during the exhibition, so in May initially, open with an army of all of the copies of these guys that would have been done during the summer, or the winter, pardon, sorry. The thing is that it never snowed, and we waited and waited and waited, and mid-January, I think, there was like a very important scientific report that said that there was no snow coming this year, that this was historical, and that this, was due to global warming, and that basically there was no hope that we would get our snow. So suddenly something that we were taking for granted, which is usually, like not something extraordinary in the Baltic states, which is snow, didn't happen. And so Augustus was forced to imagine like what would be the new rituals that we would put together as families, as kids, as whoever, when there would be no snow left. And so the solution was hay, of course, because it's like dry herbs, and clay on top. And so now you see something that is quite far from the magical imaginary or imagery from winter and snow, but this is basically, it might be like the hayman might be the snowman of tomorrow. The next work is by Riga Eiffel, but Riga Eiffel is not a so-called artist. She's someone who created a movement that is called objectude sexuality. And this movement is basically reclaiming or claiming the right to be in relationship with objects that would not be, humans, the right for humans to be in love with non-humans. And so here you have a few lovers from Erica, because we were not able to ship them all. And you have this crane, so and the bow and the Eiffel Tower, they were all made by Erica herself, but the bow. And basically Erica is it's very interesting in the way she's thinking about this relationship, because on top of all of the ethical questions that this asks, and this idea of giving attention and a renewed care and love for objects that we think culturally don't belong or don't deserve them. She was telling me, like, Rebecca, if we would see our potential lovers or potential relationship with every object we have around us, and I invite you to look around you now at the objects and imagining being in a relationship with them, so that we would not have such a waste culture. Like, we would not be throwing things, taking them, throwing them out as soon as we're not interested in them or we don't use them anymore. We would like worship them, even if we're not in a relationship anymore, because those are for example, former lovers, like of Riga, and she's now in a relationship with a longboard. And she was also pointing at something quite interesting. She's like, there are very few domains in life where humans are allowed to have very strong bonds and relationships with objects, which is the art, which is music, and which is sport. And in these domains, you can do whatever you want with your objects. So she chose sport, and she's like a champion in archery, and she's now a champion in longboarding, and she's having a very happy relationship. So this was just like a question more on the art of living, you know, like the possibility to imagine very other ways of being and feeling and acknowledging, which is also the proposition of this work by Michael Garicki. So this is called Sounds Burned Beneath, and this is basically this choir from former miners who basically do a song that is almost a love song to the mines, and which is a very stunning work and very touching, because basically these people have been working underground for years, which is one of the most dangerous activity ever that you can have, and one of the toughest job because of its precariousness. And here basically they sing like every drop falling, every bits of wind going through, every like machinery sound, and it's somehow a beautiful and immense homage to this conditions that they were having, that were their everyday life, and that they pay an homage to, although they were extremely difficult and almost horrendous. This is another part of the exhibition, and where you discover I mean, relationships with machines. And here is the work by Kristaps Ansans, who's an artist from Latvia. And this work is What Do Machines Dream About? And basically was imagining several machines that were playing with the miniature of themselves. So I don't see if you see, but this is basically a toy that has been made, and that is the replica of the very big machine that you can see here, and they are animated. And here, for example, this machine was like endlessly making this pony run, and it was basically for Kristaps reclaiming the right for machines to dream and to have like a possibility of imagining other worlds and imagining other ways of being, than being functional, than being like integrated into an economical and an industrial process. The next work is also thinking about the place of the machine, and this is a positron by Valdis Sams. So Valdis Sams is the artist we saw at the beginning of the show, who's a kinetic artist who was working with this idea of like all of the different beings meeting. And this, the positron, is basically the first time that Valdis was able to produce this work, and that was extremely touching, because when I met Valdis, he showed me like I don't know, 500 pages of collages and studies and reflections and schema of works that he was dreaming about doing, but he was never able to during the Soviet times, because there was no money, or it was not allowed politically. And so when I met him, I was like, okay, Valdis, I don't think we're going to show your collage. I think we're going to produce one work, and we're going to do something that you were never able to do, and give life to them. And so this is the first large-scale positron that Valdis ever did. And the idea was that this was this is a moving sculpture. It moves in real life, and its color changes. And this was a study from Valdis on the power of color and their influence on the human psyche and emotions. And what he did, he was doing healing machines for workers. And this was destined, or this was supposed to be installed in front of a Ukrainian worker factory, which never happened. But finally happened this year. So this is a new section about futures, and futures with an S. And this basically is a work by Marion Rolls. And the idea was that every invigilators, every mediators in the show would wear these outfits that you see. Basically, these outfits, you could transform them however you wanted. They were basically outfits that would make you ready for any type of futures. And the idea was that basically the invigilators, who were somehow like the presences of in the exhibition, and incredibly important presences, because they were the mouth, the ears, the voice of the works, and they could basically transform themselves into whatever they wanted. So depending on the way you would wear this, you would look like in your pajamas, or you would look like the Pope, you would look like ready for a safari. And it was calling lots of kind of archetypal ways of being human as well, but was addressing this idea of trying to be ready for anything. And this was made out of a material that used to be used for the Soviet army. So a textile that is, I mean, very heavy in terms of symbols and in terms of history. And the idea was basically to give it a rebirth, to give it a new life. And this is a huge stock that Marion Rolls found, and through which they did these outfits. The next work is Michaelis Fischer. Michaelis Fischer is an artist from Riga, and he was very, I mean, he's usually a painter and working a lot with like dystopian landscapes. But for this, he wanted to do like a very minimal and very impactful sculpture, which is this one, which is the triangle. So inspired from like a very primal idea of rebirth and life, the triangle. But within this triangle, you would have these different balloons that would basically kind of breathe in and breathe out, reanimated, until one of them would explode, and which was for Michaelis this moment of the end that was to be expected. So I would say balancing this feeling of like abrupt ending was like the proposition of Timur Sikin, which is an artist who was proposing here a temple for a new religion, a new type of spirituality that is called peace. And this spirituality is basically based on non-human acknowledgement, the idea that we should worship a world where humanity doesn't exist anymore. And here you see pictures from sacred forest that he has been visiting all around Latvia, and that's quite important. It's like most of the artists came to Latvia and to Riga and spent lots of time there with meeting different people or going to different places they were interested in, and most of the works are really very related to the city and to the country. The next work is by Onka Saloniemi Virtanen. It's a collective, and they were working on this very dystopian reality, which is the birth of the first man-made mineral, which is the trinitit, that was created after the atomic bombing in New Mexico and the first tries. And basically this jewelry is like a very interesting, controversial mix of like extreme beauty, because it was used as jewelry for women and was displayed on like the head of women, on models and so on, as basically a way to do a propaganda for this the most like dreadful weapon ever invented by humanity, and linking it with women and this idea of beauty. The next work also had to be reimagined, and we're reaching almost the end of the show. We have 3 works to go. This was the work by Marguerite Humeau. So Marguerite Dumont was supposed to show a very big sculpture that is a dying whale, and this sculpture was belonging to a bigger ensemble that is an inquiry from Marguerite Dumont about the idea that global warming would be responsible for the rise of spirituality amongst animals, because they see themselves dying, they see their peers disappearing, and so they would try to reach out for higher forces to be saved. And basically we could not ship the work. So as usual for this show, it was super important for me that we don't shy away from what we cannot do, from what we cannot make happen, and we will live with our ghosts. We will live with our impossibilities. And here we had like every day and all the time, like someone, a comedian, basically saying a poem that was written by Marguerite, and that was helping you to see or to imagine the sculpture that was supposed to be there, and kind of projecting yourself into imagining like this huge body that would have been present in that space instead of being really present. The next work by Nikolai Smirnov is about religious libertarians. So religious libertarians is a term that was coined by Nikolai himself, who thought about different types of individuals who did put together basically their own religion, and a religion that was not aligned with monotheism. And this one is a tribe that basically, in a community that is still active in Latvia. And this community basically thinks that they have to charm the earth, and through the different instruments that they have, and the different, you see like on the ground, or the different wood sticks and so on, they have to basically arouse the earth and like make lots of noise. So the earth through this arousing would be seduced and would start to produce and would start to grow, and would start to thrive. And so the humans could like enjoy harvesting whatever product that would be produced by the earth. The next work was by Mikhail Maximov, a Russian artist, who was imagining about an agency, literal like a company, Europa, who would basically enable you to live your last seconds, like the last seconds of your life, and this idea that you could basically travel through time, and through this work. And so that was displayed as a movie that you see on the screen, but also for very different devices. The idea was really to question, like, okay, what we started with Hugo Rondinone, you know, like that was about what do you do with your time, like the life that you have, how do you inhabit it, how do you deal with it somehow. And here is like, okay, now if you know that you have no time left, what is there that you will do, and what is there that you will find important. And so this is basically the last work before the epilogue, which is this work by Cyprien Gaillard, that is called Ocean to Ocean. And Ocean to Ocean is basically this video that was shown at the last Venice Biennial, but it was like very, very far away, hidden in the Giardini, so I'm not sure everyone saw it for those who went. But basically it's about this carriage that are being thrown in the ocean by these huge cranes. What's quite surreal, but it's happening. And basically it's to they go underwater, and they are there to try to restore the oceanic life and the ecosystems by replacing corals somehow. And this movie then goes to the Russian underground, in which you see like the marbles that are in the Moscow underground mainly, and the marbles is made out of the life that was, of course, in the ocean. And so this is the idea of like a permanent rebirth, the idea of a cycle, the idea that basically the end, the end of a world is not the end of the world. And that is also this last piece was also an invitation for the visitors, to think about what would eventually blossom at the end of this one. So that's it. That's the project. I'm very happy if one of you, hello Laura.
Hello. Yeah, thank you so much for your in-depth virtual tour. It looks very incredible what you did there, and I appreciate how you explained each of the artworks in such great detail. We've asked people to write questions in the Q&A questions, the Q&A section. There's only one question, but I do have a question. I'd like to start with it. It's a twofold question.
Yeah.
So in the beginning of your lecture, you spoke about the temporality of the exhibition, which allowed for the zeitgeist to wander around and reflecting different incertitudes, questions, and doubts. For me, this word zeitgeist kind of carries a universalist undertone, and I'm wondering if you as a curator could tell from your personal experience of living and working in this world, how you personally would grasp the term zeitgeist and how you see it reflected in the biennial.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, my zeitgeist might not be your zeitgeist for sure, but it was more like I mean, by zeitgeist, I mean like a certain type of emotions or a certain type of mental landscape that we all kind of felt in, which was quite structural, that was quite linked to the situation, which was like, we have no idea of what's coming. We don't know how deep this crisis or this moment of transformation is going to go, and we don't know how to interact with it, you know, because it felt like incredibly agile as a situation, and for us, I mean, we always felt like we were running after it, but at the same time, it was quite amazing to see that like the smallest life on earth was putting a whole civilization to its knees, you know. And I was like, I guess maybe not like everyone, but I was myself really amazed by that. And that's basically the inner voice that I call a zeitgeist is a voice that speaks about basically what we are not able to know, and what we're not able to master and control. And I guess that that this is something that is more linked to humanity, maybe, but and since its beginning, you know, but that became much more tangible in this time. And I think that the works, basically, for me, the artwork serves as guides, and I really felt like before the COVID, now when I was putting this show together, I was like, okay, I think that the artist might be amongst the last guys that we have, when we feel that like politics are failing, when we see that like ethics are failing, when we see that ecology is failing, when we see that like many different like system of thoughts are failing. I'm thinking like I was really, and I'm still very convinced that basically the world that the artists are proposing might be one that is extremely relevant and might be more relevant than ever. So for me, it's a zeitgeist in itself because it's contemporary. It's been done by artists who are living in the now and who are in their ways reacting to certain situations. They are not commenting directly on the world we live in, but they are living with it. And I think that all of their works kind of breathe in and breathe out moments, these moments of uncertainties, of doubts, of possibilities, of perspectives. And so, I mean, all of the movie and all of the exhibition was built thanks to them and after them, and yeah, as you know, as an odyssey, and I was really thinking about this literary genre and about how this idea of like going through obstacles and just like still trying to find meaning, which is something that I think many of us are very much like invested in at the moment. Find meaning, and what kind of meaning can be found is like something that I felt the artworks were giving out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very notable that you put the artist's practices and work so central. I was wondering if you could explain a bit more about the balancing act of bringing together different stories of the end of the world. On the hand, the stories from a more global perspective of the pandemic, the global problems such as climate change, destruction of ecosystems, growing inequality. You mentioned all of these things, but also on the other hand, the more local stories that are endemic to the Baltic states. for example, the Soviet occupation, but you also mentioned the fact that there wasn't any snow this year, and I can imagine the consequences for Riga, because snow is so entangled with the local culture. So I was wondering how you kind of balanced those different perspectives.
Yeah, I think that a biennial is a bit like the air, in the sense that we can build borders and say that like a reality is only true for this place and so on, but the metaphor of the air for me is quite right. The air doesn't care about the border. The air is traveling, and if the wind is like growing from Germany, from Cologne to Paris, and in Cologne there is an industry doing like lots of pollution, I will get it nevertheless, whether there is a frontier or not. So I think that there are like realities that are exceeding like the kind of geopolitical way. We've been building the world. Now the thing is that this biennial, and I think a biennial in general, or I hope, is always trying to find like or I've been spending lots of time in Riga, discussing a lot with many different people from very different fields. And what struck me and what was the beginning of this biennial was really the presence of the idea of re-enchantment in the culture itself. Because I was like completely struck by the fact that in Latvia, like many days are still very much organized after like seasonal cosmic rhythms. Ligo, which is one of the most important moment in the calendar, is for the summer solstice at the end of June, and it's, I don't know, the equivalent for us would be I guess Christmas, or it's extremely important, and it's a moment where you have like huge celebrations, huge coming together, and moments of worshiping basically the seasons and these cyclical rhythms. Then you would have like the different knowledges that have been completely disappearing from my culture. For example, like if you would go out in the forest or just go out, like they all know the names of the plants, of their healing properties. It was quite stunning, this knowledge that I know my culture doesn't have and has been erasing completely. And so then on the historical perspective, what I was seeing is that basically Latvia has been under permanent colonization since the 30th century. It's been colonized and occupied by Germans, by Russians, by Swedish people. It's been free for 30 years. It's like a very young country, and this gave me like a very strong sense of the fact that the world's ended many times in Latvia, like so many times when like because of wars, because of occupations, because of moments where basically the identities were in fluxes, like the systems were in fluxes, the structures were in fluxes, but still things came back and things changed, and very strong strings of thoughts of culture like maintained. Like there is also this absolutely stunning culture of dainas. So the dainas are this oral poetry. They are like haikus. It's more or less 4 sentences, and there are short poems that have been transmitted mainly through and by women. It's millions that have been now counted, and that exists since the 16th century. And they are all speaking about a problem or a question between the relationship of humanity with whatever surrounds it. And this was a huge inspiration for me, because I guess that this is the whole project of the biennial, is to basically once again ask what the dainas were asking like 5 centuries ago. It's like, what kind of relationships are we building with our environment? So I guess that this is a question that belongs and is incarnated in a very special way in Latvia, but that belongs to all of us as humans, I guess, in general. So it was like also trying to a bit like going from the ground to the air always, and focusing on what brings us together, and issues that are traveling despite borders. You were naming global warming. and those who are existing really in depth in the region. And I think the work of Timur Sikin or Lina Lapelite, for example, were really addressing those questions.
Okay, there are much more questions coming in, so I will try to ask some of them. There's a question by Yanni Stefano, who says, "Thank you for your presentation. This biennial seems to me an ode not only to the end of the world, but also to the end of the biennial as we know it. Which meaning, ambition, and impact could a new system of biennials embrace if you want to break free from the dependency from the mobility of works, artists, and audiences?" And that kind of reminds me what you said at the beginning before we went live, that you saw the film as a sort of last resort, whereas I think it brings about a new form of experimentation. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, first to come back to the question of the biennial, I think there is something that is to be inquired with what I mean the crisis allowed me to do the craziest thing that I would have never dared to do because of the protocols, you know, of the showing photocopies in a biennial, or like you know, replacing an original work by plywood, painted plywood, and so on. It was like it opened like avenues for me and the artists. But I think, and I've been thinking a lot about it, that we could be even more radical. And I'm thinking about another biennial where I would be much more radical, even because it is opened up like lots of thinking. And definitely what I was trying to avoid as much as possible was to be able to put a biennial that could have existed anywhere else. I really wanted to be so in touch with the space and the territory that it was impossible to imagine that this exhibition could travel anywhere, because it would just not make sense. You know, it would not have resonated. It would have been like something completely empty without this entanglement where we were, you know. And that was that is something that I think can be much more radical. And I would go, you know, for example, in the direction of Bridget Polk, so who's the woman doing Balancing Rocks. She didn't bring anything but herself. We gathered the rocks all around Riga. So all of these rocks are basically testimonies of different layers of history of the city, and both its architecture and mineral history. And she was basically like making, jungling these different layers. But and she worked like no one else, like for 3 weeks, sweating on putting all of this landscape together again, like Sisyphus. And at the end of the biennial, which lasted only 3 weeks, it was all gone, and the stones came back to where they were, and it all disappeared. And Nina Baya was also like that, and Lina Lapelite was also like that, and Via Nina, I mean, many works. But I would like to go to that step where all the works appear and disappear. And what happens then, like when you think that basically you can build an exhibition with whatever is around you and with nothing that is imported. And I believe that artworks are very much about the idea of shifting attention. And I've always been quite convinced of that. And I think that we can be, as curators, even more radical that way. Now for the movie, but the movie came because it was a way to, for me, it was a healing process. It was kind of this exhibition. I mean, I'm speaking about it now. It's just a few months ago and then it stopped, but you can imagine that it's been quite strong. I mean, I saw work of a few months, a few years, like many today, completely collapse. I'm not alone in this situation. I guess we all are in a way or another. And I had to build something out of the ruins, like literally within a few days, a few weeks, with the incredible team of the Riga Biennial and the team of curators. and the movie was kind of bringing everything together somehow, like, you know, it was putting together the bits and pieces that were missing, and somehow was helping to make to give a certain meaning to all of that as well, because we were opening only for 3 weeks. It was just a very such a short moment compared to the amount of energy and work that was put together, that this movie was also countering a culture that I've always been thinking about. And I wonder why I did myself specialize into producing objects that last 3 months, and that disappear, and that, you know, you work on it for years, and you put it together, and it's basically a very it's quite a deadly culture, you know. It's like there is something quite interesting about the ritual of exhibitions, which is quite new in the history of humanity. But we say like, oh yeah, okay, we're going to put together like objects, and we're going to think about the meaning they do together, and we're going to inquire on this, and then it's going to disappear, and we're going to work on a new one. It's like, when I think about it, I'm like, okay. And I think that movies, well, they last, you know, they last, and they're suddenly like they were, I mean, for me, I was confronted with the meaning of what I was doing and what I wanted to say about it. And it's not easy, you know. This movie is like, I don't know what to think about it. It's like very special, very, very special.
There is another interesting question from Ans Mertens, who's curious about the status of the artworks in the film. Do they serve as figures, artifacts, traces in function of the narrativity of the created project, or are they still independent?
That's a very good question, because that was really the very tricky. That is something that I'm still questioning, to be honest. But what I wanted to do was not, I didn't want to close the meaning of the works, because I mean, it's a 90 minutes movie, a bit less, 80. You can't say everything about the work that you want to say, you know. You cannot explore all perspectives that the work is opening. So what I decided, instead of trying to be you know, completely exhaustive, was to go through the subjectivity of the voice. And basically the voice is kind of speaking about ideas that are, of course, conveyed by this work, the work you see through the camera, but never kind of addressing it directly. It's more like kind of what kind of questions, what kind of thinking these works open up, but on a very, very subjective perspective. Because this was for me the only way to get away with manipulation, with enjailment of the works and so on. It's like, okay, I cannot do that to the works, or I want to avoid it as much as possible. So I'm gonna write the text and the voiceover of a voice that is a bit crazy, that is a bit ungraspable, and that its own like meaning system, and the works guide this voice somehow. But the voice is not trying to, I mean, as least as possible, trying to jail them. But I would say they are not artifacts, they are more like enablers. I really think that they are enablers.
Okay. I'm going to share a last question with you, since we have to wrap up. You kind of responded to it already by saying that what you learned from the biennial is that you would prefer to make more radical statements in the future. But the question is, what aspects of this challenging curatorial project you will carry with you in the future, and to what extent do you think they will inform your curatorial practice from now on? So it would also be interesting to think about how it impacts your work at Lafayette, for example.
I think every single adventure we went through for this biennial, and I have to acknowledge all of the crazy team on board who did all of this magic happen. I'm not alone, but I think the freedom the freedom we suddenly, I really, it just opened, the situation was such a mess. It was so desperate that suddenly we could do anything we wanted. And I'm forever thankful and grateful for the direction and the founder of the Agnia, the founder of the biennial, and Anastasia, the director, because they kind of, we all went crazy together for this alternative project that was built like within a few weeks, and they did support it like fully. But you know, every conversation with the artists, because everything was made with the artist, like, and we all like did brainstorm together on alternatives that we could put together, but they were all mind openers. And I think that now I just I mean, I've always been in my shows trying to put together experiences and really think of the exhibition not as a static object, but more as a space and time you inhabit, you know. Not I'm not interested in static things and immobility. That's something that I despise a lot. So I have quite a contradiction with the job I've chosen, and I'm trying basically through creating to try to find ways of renewing this ritual, and renewing the way we interact, the way we value certain ways of beings or others. So what I will do, yeah, is that I will go even more radical. I think in the sense of trying to find ways to produce works of art that are not necessarily works of art, or it's like, I mean, Marcel Duchamp was a great inspiration for years. Like, can we make works of art that are not of art? Is a question he asked in 1914. And this is what I'm more and more haunted with. And he said another one. Sorry, it's kind of lame to quote Duchamp, but what comes to my mind now, he was saying that the biggest artists of the 21st century would disappear. And I'm very interested in this idea of disappearance. How suddenly a work of art is basically coming out of whatever is around you and can come back and dilute again. And I think a biennial, my dream is to do a biennial only made out of that. But I think that, you know, I have to acknowledge people like Pierre Riga, who I think is already like well on its way in this type of thinking as well. Now, regarding Lafayette Anticipation, what we're trying to do at the foundation is to work with artists who are very entangled with the knots of now, who are not literally commenting on these knots that are like just kind of problems of articulation we have as humans. But right now we have Wu Tseng, whose show is very much speaking about the question of perspective. And she's used this beautiful geometrical figure, which is the Penrose stairs. And depending on the way you look at these stairs, they will look like infinite stairs or they will completely explode. And this is a big metaphor for this question of positions. And all of her exhibition is around this beautiful movie, her latest, called The Show Is Over, where you have a group, a community dancing, and is very much she's very much inquiring on the gesture of peaceful inertia and ways of resisting through different choreographies that have been growing a lot during these past centuries, and mainly also in the history of Blackness and of Black communities. There is a certain choreographies of being that is like a very specific and linked with oppression. So all of this, and this, of course, echoes, I mean, in France at the moment, like crazy, but police violence and political violence, they go together usually. And we find ways for this exhibition to kind of open up perspectives and thinking about like all of these problems were all like very much worked by. And this the last show was Rachel Rose, and Rachel Rose is someone who's been always thinking about upheavals and this moment of huge shift in civilizations, in emotions, in sensitivities, and this happened at the moment of the COVID crisis. So Of course, it gave us like lots of food and lots of material to like work on public programs and really like expand on these questions. The next one will be Martin Margiela. And Martin Margiela, so it's his first show as an artist, although my theory is that Martin Margiela has always been an artist, but he got lost in fashion. Where he did like put together, of course, amazing works and quite conceptual and aesthetical revolutions. But the show that we're going to open at the Foundation is really, it is like never shown works that he just produced these last 2 years for this show, and that are about disappearance, about the possibility of about addressing again what I was telling you about, like how you can suddenly shift the attention and the way you look at things, and suddenly they will start to exist. And all of his work has been, and all of his life has been dedicated to that, is to give a new dignity to the whatever, to the your surroundings, to whatever you could not see. And so basically more than that, or on top of that, every show is like reshuffling completely the space. Koolhaas, who did design the space, said that he was doing it in the service of the artist, and I'm interpreting that in a very literal way, in the sense that we are changing the spaces quite radically for every show. And you know, the building has like 49 different positions, so we can move down and up the floors, which is quite crazy, because we don't have this way of thinking about space, so it's quite an exercise as well for the curators, for the artists, but it helps us to really move completely our understanding of the space and what we can do with it, and thus try to give an experience that is as close to the work and its tension as possible. So that's what we are trying to achieve when we can be open, which we took, we've been very used to this year to open the show and close it 3 days after. That's our specialty. But we are reopening, fingers crossed, mid-December with Wu, who was open only for a few days.
Okay. And on that note, when will the film premiere? Will it also be at Lafayette?
Well, the film is now going to festivals, and we'll see what they think about this. And so this might be premiered in festivals, and then I think we will wait for humanity being able to gather again, and we will premiere. Or, I mean, we will definitely premiere it in several places, of course, in Riga, and I think in Berlin and Paris for sure. And the idea is that as the biennial itself was like extremely affordable and with a very low price, so everyone could come, and which worked. Like we had an incredible audience coming. We had 21,000 people in 3 weeks, which was like really amazing for Latvia in terms of usual numbers. And we really worked a lot on making this project accessible and as democratic as possible for every way. And I didn't talk to you about it, like all of the text and so on, but long story short, we will put it on a website at some point, and anyone will be able to see it for free.
Okay, super. There is so much to speak about. It's such a shame we don't have the time. There are more questions that are very interesting. So I propose that I will just gather them all and send them to you via email, so you can at least have a look at them. I'm sorry to everybody who participated that we can't deal with your questions right now. But thank you so much for attending. And also thank you so much, Rebecca, for your very generous and very interesting talk.
Thank you very much for your invitation.
With pleasure. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.